One of the more prominent January 6, 2021 MAGA insurrectionists who was convicted of seditious conspiracy just got slapped with a brutal but richly deserved 22-year prison sentence. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. So when it comes to MAGA, obviously in terms of the most prominent attention-getting legal dilemmas, right, or legal dramas are those surrounding Donald Trump. Okay, his 4 indictments, 1 from New York, 1 from Georgia, and 2 from Special Counsel Jack Smith. But we also have to remember that there were, I would say, mid-level participants in the January 6th insurrection that were below Trump and above the foot soldiers, the hundreds of people who stormed the Capitol. And one such person is Enrique Tarrio, who used to lead a MAGA militia group called the Proud Boys, okay? Now, he was convicted of seditious conspiracy at trial by a jury of his peers, and then he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. The previous record had been held by another militia, a MAGA militia member or leader of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes. He was also convicted of seditious conspiracy and then sentenced to an 18-year prison sentence. So now we have a new record holder, and that is Enrique Tarrio. And I imagine his sphincter is quite clenched at the moment in terms of the dread he must feel, knowing that he's going to spend, a quarter of a century in a jail cell. But he richly deserves it. And so I want to unpack this and also the response from some of people on the right, like Charlie Kirk, how upset they are at the result here. So Enrique Tarrio, former leader of the right-wing extremist group the Proud Boys, was sentenced on Wednesday to 22 years in prison for his role in the deadly January 6th Capitol insurrection. Tarrio's sentencing caps one of the highest-profile prosecutions related to the insurrection, and the longest sentence handed down. As we said, the previous record holder was Stuart Rhodes. He was found guilty in May of seditious conspiracy, and prosecutors had sought a 33-year sentence for him. So, hey, that 22 years, that potential sentence was reduced by 33%. So I guess congratulations, Enrique. It could have been worse. He wasn't arrested at January 6th because he was arrested days earlier for vandalizing a BLM banner at a historic black church in D.C. So, and this gets to what Charlie Kirk and some other prominent right-wingers are going to complain about. They're like, he wasn't even there. We'll get to that in a minute, right? Prosecutors have argued that Tarrio maintained command over the Proud Boys after his arrest and cheered on the group as its members stormed the U.S. Capitol. He noted that he took credit for the riot on behalf of the group. No organization put more boots on the ground at the Capitol on January 6th than the Proud Boys, and they were at the forefront of every major breach of the Capitol's defenses, leading the on-the-ground efforts to storm the seat of government, said Matthew Graves, U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, in a statement. The leaders of the Proud Boys and the leaders of the Oath Keepers, who conspired before, during, and after the siege of the Capitol to use force against their own government to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, have now been held accountable. And some other facts just to point out, the Justice Department said that more than 1,300 people have been charged in connection to January 6th, and around 570, almost half, have pled guilty. So why is Charlie Kirk upset? Well, in addition to just sympathizing overall with the Proud Boys and Enrique Tarrio and their goals and being perfectly willing to install Donald Trump as the unelected leader of the United States, irrespective of his term, Charlie Kirk is quibbling because he says the Biden regime just sentenced Enrique Tarrio to 22 years in prison for a riot he was not present at, for plotting to overthrow the government without his followers carrying a single firearm. You live in a country with political prisoners. The problem is, the judge who sentenced Enrique Tarrio was a Trump-appointed judge. So that's really interesting. So the Biden regime is so nefarious. It transcends political allegiance, the political allegiance and the identity of the person who appointed the sentencing judge, and apparently it transcends time. That's the scary thing about the Biden regime, guys. Folks, the Biden regime is so, terrifying. Even though it's led by, Charlie Kirk says, President Biden is this dementia-riddled, octogenarian who doesn't understand where he is. But he's also a sinister Palpatine/Littlefinger/Sauron tier mastermind that he's like puppeteering things through time and space. So even though Donald Trump appointed the sentencing judge, Joe Biden apparently is responsible for that. Joe Biden is also responsible for the sentence that the sentencing judge, the Trump-appointed sentencing judge, gave. And the idea that you can't hold Enrique Tarrio accountable because he wasn't physically present at the time is rather much like saying that Osama bin Laden couldn't have been responsible for 9/11 because he wasn't in either of the planes that crashed into the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. It's ridiculous, right? That's the whole point of his leadership. He doesn't have to be physically present to be morally and legally culpable for the actions of his henchmen. Okay, so it's a self-defeating argument. But I love how upset they're getting about it. They don't like the fact that these insurrectionists and these traitors to the country are being held accountable. And I think perhaps if I were to speculate, the fact that Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes and others like them are getting hit with very harsh penalties, when you factor in the legal woes facing Donald Trump, it's probably creating the sense like, oh my God, we're seeing signs that people who are adjudicating these decisions, if there are convictions in trial for January 6th insurrectionists, they're going to get the book thrown at them. And that means Donald Trump is at greater legal risk in the mind of Charlie Kirk than ever. And hopefully, Charlie Kirk is right. And what we see here with Stuart Rhodes and Enrique Tarrio is building up to a crescendo which will culminate with Donald Trump. Hopefully, he will be found guilty in his many indictments, and the judges in question will throw the book at him because he deserves it.